"Wonders are many," said Odysseus, when Circe had finished the tale of Bellerophon, "and I myself have seen strange things enough in my wanderings. But so strange a monster as the Chimera I have neither seen nor heard of." "I could tell you of a stranger one still," replied Circe, "and I will do so, if you please, tomorrow night. But now it is high time to go to rest." The next night, Odysseus and his comrades reminded the witch of her promise, and she related the following story. Aegeus, king of Athens, was prosperous in other things, but his grief was that he had no child, though twice married. So, when his second wife died, he went to inquire of the oracle at Delphi. But the god gave him dark counsel, in these words, "Touch not the mystic vessel, until thou hast returned to Athens." Aegeus could make nothing of this, so he resolved to visit his friend and neighbor, King Pittheus of Troezen, who had a great name for wisdom, and ask him to interpret the oracle. Now Pittheus perceived that it signified that Aegeus should not take to wife any woman but an Athenian, but in his subtlety he declared himself unable to interpret it, for he had one fair daughter, named Aethra, and as Troezen was but a petty kingdom, he greatly desired to ally himself by marriage with the rich and powerful king of Athens. "Though I have no son to reign in my stead," he thought, "the sons of my daughter shall rule over both Troezen and Athens." With this design, he hospitably pressed King Aegeus to tarry a while under his roof, trusting that Aethra's beauty would do the rest. And, as he hoped, Aegeus fell so deeply in love with the maiden that nothing would serve him but to marry her then and there. But wise as Pittheus was, he could not read the heart of a girl. Aethra was as much in love as her bridegroom, and on their wedding night, she revealed to him the interpretation of the oracle, which her father had told her, entreating pardon for her share in the deceit. "Nay, sweetheart," said Aegeus, "I love you nevertheless, you did your part like a dutiful daughter. But vows made through fraud bind no man, nor dare I cross the will of Apollo, so I will away to Athens with the first light, only, now I bethink me, pray come with me a little way out of the town, and there we will say farewell." So they two stole out of Troezen at daybreak and came where a great stone stood by the wayside. There Aegeus halted and, rolling back the stone for he was as strong as a bull, he scooped a hole with his sword in the ground it had covered, laid the sword and his sandals therein, and rolled back the stone over all. Then said he, "Fair Aethra, the gods may grant that you shall bear me a son. If it be so, and he grows to manhood, let him bring my sword and sandals to me for a token, and I will acknowledge him." So saying, he left her and went his way to Athens. When her time came, Aethra brought forth a man-child, lusty and fair, and his grandsire named him Theseus. Wherein, as some hold, Pittheus showed a divining mind, for the name means he that sets in order, and Theseus lived to set in good order the Athenian commonwealth. The boy was tenderly reared by his mother and taught all the wisdom of antiquity by his grandfather. When he was 18 years old, Aethra led her son to the stone where the tokens lay and told him for the first time the story of his parentage. Easily did young Theseus lift the massy stone, and at his mother's bidding he took the sword and sandals and set out forthwith for Athens to make himself known to his father. Aethra would fain have had him go by sea, because the landward road was at that time beset at several points by certain notorious robbers, but Theseus, who burned to make proof of his manhood, laughed at her fears, and on his journey along the coast road he encountered and killed 3 of those terrors to travelers. But a greater danger awaited him at Athens. "You have heard, Odysseus, of the great enchantress Medea, mine own kinswoman, for, like myself, she was descended from the sun god, and how she revenged herself upon her faithless lover, Jason, who by her aid alone had escaped death and won the golden fleece. Now after her deed of vengeance, Medea fled to Athens, where her charm and subtle wit so wrought upon King Aegeus that he shortly married her. By her magic art, she knew at first sight that Theseus was coming, and, feeling all the jealous hate of a stepmother, she resolved to destroy him. So she warned Aegeus that, on the 8th day of that month, a stranger would enter his house, seeking hospitality, of whom he must beware, for that man was hired to murder him by certain pretenders to the Athenian throne. Sure enough, on the 8th day, a stranger youth appeared. Aegeus welcomed him hospitably after his custom and gave him the seat of honor at his evening banquet. But he had ready beside him a cup of wine in which Medea had mingled a deadly poison, and this he was about to hand to his guest, when Theseus, by some divine prompting, unbuckled his sword for greater ease and laid it on the table. Aegeus no sooner beheld that token than he dashed the cup to the ground and embraced the youth with tears of joy, acknowledging him for his son and heir. As for Medea, she vanished that moment from the banqueting hall and was never more seen on earth. The Athenians say she flew away in a chariot drawn by two winged dragons, but whither she went they do not profess to know. All went merrily at Athens during the weeks of late summer that followed the coming of Theseus. The old king grew daily fonder of his new-found heir and never wearied of giving feasts to the citizens in his honor. Yet before these halcyon days ended, Theseus grew aware that some hidden grief or dread oppressed the Athenians. To all his inquiries, they would only answer, with a shudder, that the time was at hand for paying the Cretan tribute. Theseus then questioned his father, who at first desired him to hold his peace and not pry into matters which did not concern him, but, when he saw the youth resolute to be informed either by himself or by others, he spoke thus. "You probably know, my son, that the great island of Crete is ruled by the most powerful of monarchs, whose name is Minos, and whose father, though a mortal mother bore him, is none other than the king of gods and men. I had not long occupied my throne when the son of Minos, Aegeus by name, came to compete in the athletic games I had newly founded. Easily, I confess, he overcame our best athletes, but this I solemnly affirm, it was without my consent or knowledge that he was waylaid and murdered by certain jealous rivals on his journey hence to the Isthmian games, where doubtless fresh triumphs awaited him. Yet nothing would convince King Minos of my innocence. He declared war upon me and forthwith set sail for our coast with all his navy. But by mistake, he laid siege to our neighbor city, Megara. There he achieved a most inglorious conquest, for, finding means to come at the king's daughter and making pretense of love, he persuaded the wretched girl to betray her father and her country. She, you must know, was called Scylla. Her father's name was Nisus. Now, by divine dispensation, Nisus had on his head a lock unlike the rest of his hair, for it was purple. This lock was enchanted, and, so long as he wore it, Nisus could never be conquered in war. No one but Nisus himself knew the virtue of the lock, except his daughter, whom he dearly loved and trusted with the secret. And Scylla, thinking to win her lover's heart, first told Minos the secret, and then, at his bidding, cut off the lock while Nisus slept, and fled with it to the Cretan ships. Truly, she reaped her just reward, for Minos no sooner saw what she had brought him than he had her bound to an anchor, and flung, shrieking, over his galley's side. That same day, he carried Megara by storm and slew Nisus with his own hand. Our turn came next. We were in no case to resist, for the gods had visited us that year with dearth and pestilence. What could we do but accept the terms Minos offered as by mouth of herald, namely, that he would spare Athens if we swore to pay him a tribute of 7 youths and 7 maidens every 9th year? We did accept, and tomorrow, alas, the tribute falls due, and a Cretan warship will be here to receive it. The lots will be drawn at daybreak, in Athena's temple. A register is kept there of the youth of both sexes between the ages of 15 and 20, and the name of each inscribed on a tablet. These tablets will be placed in 2 urns, one for either sex, and Athena's priestess will draw 7 names from each urn. You may now understand, my son, why the natural gaiety of our folk is so dismally eclipsed. Rich or poor, high or low, every man is haunted by the fear that his own son or daughter may be one of the Cretan captives, whose dreadful fate they too well know. Why, does Minos make slaves of them? Asked Theseus indignantly. Worse, far worse than that, replied his father, shuddering. Those hapless ones are given as prey to a strange and fearful creature called the Minotaur, whose food is human flesh. This portent has the body of a man, but the head and hoofs of a bull, and has his lair in a dungeon within the royal palace. 'Tis said he is the offspring of Minos's queen, Pasiphae, whom, for some great sin the gods caused to give birth to a monster, wherefore Minos durst not destroy the prodigy, from superstitious awe, but concealed him from the light of day. You look pale, my Theseus, and no wonder, but fear not, being so newly come, your name is not yet enrolled upon our register, so your lot will not be cast with the others." But the old king little knew his son's mettle. When the lots were about to be drawn for the youths, Theseus stepped forward in sight of all and bade the priestess draw 6 lots only from the urn, for he, as the king's son, had the right to share the dangers of his folk, and claimed place among the doomed 7. The people broke forth into tears and blessings, but the king was almost distraught with grief. But in vain he pleaded with Theseus to give up his rash resolve. He comforted the old man as best he could, bidding him take heart and remember how Jason and brave Perseus, while still young as he, had come safe through even greater perils than this, by divine aid. "I, too," he said, "will put my trust in the gods, and by their help I shall destroy the monster and rid Athens of this hateful tribute. But if I fail, I cannot die at a nobler cause." That same day, the war galley sent by King Minos appeared in the harbour of Athens, and the 7 youths and 7 maidens embarked and sailed away amid the weeping and lamentation of the whole city. When the Athenian captives arrived at the royal city of Knossos, they were brought to a palace vast and splendid beyond anything they could have imagined, where Minos received them like welcome guests and entertained them sumptuously for 9 days. The rest began to think the dreadful tale about the Minotaur was a fable, and they were in gay spirits. But Theseus saw the king's cold, gleaming eyes watching them at the feast, and a cruel smile on his dark face, and he guessed with a thrill of horror that this soft living and high feeding was meant to make them better food for the monster. So he kept on his guard, although Minos treated the young prince with special honor, making him sit every day at his own table, where his eldest daughter served them as cupbearer, after the Cretan custom. Now the Princess Ariadne, that was the maiden's name, no sooner set eyes on the handsome young Athenian than pity filled her heart to think he must so shortly die a hideous death. That is to say, she thought at first it was pity, but before they had met many times she knew that it was love. Then she resolved to save him. The first thing was to get speech with him alone, and this was not very difficult, though the palace was a nest of spies. For, as the princess knew, her father cared nothing how much she saw of his captive, though as a rule she was strictly guarded. He even told her to make much of the pretty lad and keep him in a good humor. "You may be as kind as you choose," he added, smiling grimly, "for dead men tell no tales." So on the 8th morning, Theseus was summoned by a slave to join the princess in her own garden of roses. And there, with downcast eyes and bated breath, Ariadne told her love, modestly yet proudly, as became her royalty, and that she had devised means to save him from imminent death. "For tomorrow," she said, "my father gives the Minotaur its first victim, and that victim will be you. Theseus, if you die, I will die too. But do as I bid you and you shall slay the monster and escape to Athens with your comrades, and with me, unless you would leave me to endure my father's vengeance." What could Theseus do but thank her with his whole heart and vow that, if indeed her plan succeeded, he would take her to Athens as his bride? Grateful he was, and well might be, and if he did not love the fair Cretan, who shall blame him for not feeling bound to tell her so at such a moment? I think he did not love her. Her dark beauty was too strange, too barbaric to please Greek eyes, and he could not forget she came of evil race, child of Minos and of that queen Pasiphae whose nameless sin had brought a judgment upon her. Yet when he vowed that vow, he honestly meant to keep it. The lair of the Minotaur was in the inmost recesses of a vast underground building called Labyrinth in the Cretan tongue. It had been built for King Minos by the famous artificer Daedalus, on purpose to keep the monster and his cannibal orgies concealed from human eyes. Daedalus therefore built a maze of winding, vaulted passages, so artfully contrived that whoever entered came before he was aware to the central den, and if he then fled ere the Minotaur could seize him, he wandered hopelessly lost till he came to the den once more, but never could he find the entrance to the maze. Now Minos believed that the secret of the labyrinth was known only to himself and Daedalus, for when it was finished he had shut up there the luckless masons who built it, to be devoured by its awful inmate. And he only spared Daedalus the like fate in order to use his peerless skill on other works. So he gave Daedalus a lodging and workshop in the palace, paid him magnificently, and lavished favors upon him. And the Princess Ariadne, then a child, loved nothing better than to visit the workshop and watch the great craftsman either carving a statue in cypress wood or painting in enamel, or making some rare piece of goldsmith's work, for of all these arts he was master. Daedalus, I must tell you, was no Cretan, but an Athenian, who had fled his country and sought the powerful protection of King Minos because he had slain a fellow citizen by mischance. The lonely exile's heart warmed to the beautiful little princess. He soon loved her like a daughter of his own, and, as she grew older, confided to her all his dealings with her father. Thus Ariadne knew all about the labyrinth, and that Theseus must wander therein till he perished of hunger, even if by valor and good fortune he should slay the Minotaur. Hopeless seemed that adventure, but what is too hard for a woman's wit when love has sharpened it? By tears and prayers, Ariadne so wrought upon Daedalus who, besides, had kept a kindness towards his fellow countrymen, that he gave her the means to save Theseus. "Give your lover," said he, "this ball of linen thread, bid him fasten one end of it to the door-post of the labyrinth, and carry the ball with him, letting it unwind as he goes onward. By this clue, if the gods grant him to overcome the monster, he will find his way back through the maze. But even when free of the labyrinth, how will he escape from Minos?" "I have provided for that," said Ariadne. And so she had. King Minos was bland as ever when the next morning he thus accosted Theseus, "Princely son of Aegeus, I hear that strange tales are rife among the Athenians concerning the fate of their children who come as hostages to Crete. Now you yourself are witness that they suffer no ill usage at my hands, and the rumor is false that says they are thrown into the den of a man-eating monster. But true it is that by divine dispensation such a monster hath his dwelling beneath my palace, and if you, gallant prince, can rid me of that pest by slaying him in his lair, I will remit forever the tribute Athens owes me." "I take the challenge, king," said Theseus eagerly, "only swear to me by most high Zeus, whom we both adore, to keep your promise." Minos took that oath, nothing doubting, and straightway led the young Athenian to the labyrinth. As the heavy iron door shut with a clang, the stern, black-bearded king turned away, smiling grimly. "There goes a dainty morsel," he muttered, "for Pasiphae's child." It was by his own valor and his skill as a swordsman that Theseus met the onrush of the Minotaur and laid that monster dead at his feet. But his escape, not only from the labyrinth, but from Crete, he owed to Ariadne. Besides the clue of thread, she had given him a cluster of dates and a small flask of wine, which he carried under his cloak, so that he might wait without faintness in the labyrinth until midnight, for nowhere else would he be so safe. And at midnight, while all slept, she guided him and his 13 companions to the harbor, where she had a little ship waiting, well manned and provisioned. With muffled oars, the sailors rowed her out of harbor, then hoisted sail and away northward with a favoring breeze. At dawn they sighted the fair Isle of Naxos and put in there for fresh water, the one thing that had been forgotten in the haste of their departure. Ariadne, seeing a clear stream running down to the sea, must needs go ashore to bathe and refresh herself while the water casks were being filled. She went along the wooded banks, out of sight of the others, and having bathed in a pool of the stream, sat down to rest a little while. But being drowsy after a night of watching, sleep overtook her unawares. When Ariadne woke, she knew that she must have been asleep several hours, for the sun was high overhead. Surprised that no one had come to look for her, she hastened back to the shore. There was no one there, and no ship in the bay. Thunderstruck, hardly trusting her eyes, Ariadne remained staring at the spot where it had been, as if she thought the waves had closed over it by some enchantment, and it would suddenly reappear. The cry of a gull swooping past roused her. She looked up, looked seaward, and saw the ship, already far out, heading westward under full sail. Already too far to hear her piercing cries, soon too far to see the glittering veil that she tore off and wildly signaled with as she rushed to a headland near, but in her frenzy of despair she still waved and shrieked, and cried out, "Theseus! Theseus! Oh, cruel! Oh, traitor, come back!" Long after the dark Cretan sails had passed out of her ken. Worn out at last, she flung herself prone on the ground and prayed to die. But the gods, who willed otherwise, cast a merciful slumber over her. Here Circe broke off her story, for it was growing late, promising to tell the rest on the morrow. Was it willfully, or by some strange mischance, asked Odysseus, the next night, that Theseus deserted Ariadne in Naxos? That, replied Circe, with her enigmatic smile, is a disputed question. Some of the Athenians, willing to acquit their hero of ingratitude, declare that he believed she had returned on board and was among the Athenian maidens when he sailed away from the island, and that a strong gale prevented his putting back when he found out his mistake. But there was nothing to prevent his sending a ship for her after he got safe home to Athens, which he never did. Others, again, say that he was moved to abandon her at that very place and time by heaven-sent prompting. "Why do you smile, Circe?" said Odysseus gravely. "Many men are visited by these divine intimations. I have felt them myself in moments of danger, and only impious men disregard them. Who can say that Theseus did not act on one?" "No one, my friend," replied Circe, shrugging her white shoulders, "except perhaps Theseus himself. And he is dead, you know. But, to deal frankly with you, I think he did act on a sudden impulse, only, it came from his own heart. Remember who and what Ariadne was, an alien, child of an evil mother, and of his country's detested foe. How would the Athenians take his bringing the daughter of Minos home with him as their future queen? Above all, he did not love her. Was even a little repelled by her passion for him, perhaps felt that she could hate as fiercely as she loved. Yet marry her he must, for he could see it would be safer for him to enrage a tigress than such a woman. And then, so it seems to me, as he watched her disappear into the Naxian woods, he suddenly saw a way out of his trouble. If only she did not come back too quickly. As luck would have it, Ariadne gave him plenty of time to get clear away. Did the Cretan crew make no trouble about leaving their princess behind?" asked Elpina. "If they did," answered Circe, "Theseus and the Athenian lads soon brought them to reason. They were only slaves, you see, and unarmed. But now for the end of my story. Theseus had promised his father that if he returned alive, he would hoist a white sail as his ship neared Athens, and day after day old Aegeus sat on a hill above the harbor, watching anxiously for that signal. At last, a ship of the Cretan build and scarlet color hove in sight, and, as she drew nearer, a great shout went up from the folk on the quays, for they could see a company in Athenian garb standing at the prow. "The children! Joy, joy, it is our children!" was the cry, and the sound of it brought all Athens, men and women, rushing to the harbor. But the old king gave but one look at the ship's sails and sank back in his chair, death pale and trembling. "Black," he gasped out. "Black sails. My Theseus is dead." And with that word, his spirit fled from earth. Now black the sails were, for such is the Cretan fashion, and Theseus had forgotten his promise to display a white one. Thus was the bitterness of grief and self-reproach mingled with the gladness of his homecoming. But not even sorrow for their good old king's sad end could overcloud the rapturous joy of the Athenians that day. The whole city rang with the sounds of feasting and revelry, with hymns of praise to the gods and songs in honor of Theseus. Every altar blazed with sacrifice, every house was decked with garlands, and its door set hospitably open that whoever would might come in and share with its inmates the best fare they could provide. Men, women, and children, all in their best attire, thronged the streets, talking, laughing, and exchanging glad greetings not only with friends but with strangers. And ever since then, the Athenians have kept that day of the year as a day of high festival after the same manner, in remembrance of the great deliverance that Theseus wrought for them by slaying the Cretan Minotaur. So ended the first great adventure of Theseus. Many others befell him afterward, and by valor and good fortune he came safe through all perils and reigned prosperously over Athens for many years. For all that, he did not, in the end, escape punishment for breaking faith with Ariadne, and that punishment, by the strange workings of fate, came through his taking another Cretan bride. But that story I will tell you some other time. As for Ariadne, because she had dared so greatly for love's sake, the gods would not suffer her to pine and perish broken-hearted, but made her happy forever, in wondrous wise. In those days there was no city in Naxos, and none dwelt there but a few fisher folk, living in huts scattered along the shores. The rest of the isle was solitary woodland, beautiful with groves of stately trees and with sunny glades where the wild vine's clusters ripened unseen. Now Bacchus, god of the vine, loved to visit Naxos in the time of grape harvest, and that time was come when Theseus put in at the isle. Ariadne was roused from sleep by a merry din of voices, laughter, and clashing cymbals from the neighboring wood. She rose up, bewildered, and but half awake. "Where am I?" she murmured, then remembering all, and careless what might now betide her, she turned her back on the wood and gazed seaward with yearning eyes. Standing there, wrapped in her grief, she neither saw nor heard the joyous band that came dancing out of the shade of the forest. Wood nymphs tripping hand in hand, shaggy satyrs capering uncouthly, and after them a car drawn by two sleek leopards, whereon stood a youth beautiful exceedingly, with an ivy wreath on his long, dark curls and a fawnskin floating from his white shoulders. A half-tipsy old man, also garlanded with ivy, rode on an ass behind him. Beholding Ariadne, the whole company halted, amazed. Strange sight indeed, in that desert place was a lovely lady richly dressed as any queen and crowned with a coronal of sparkling gems. But Bacchus saw only the face which, at his train's startled cry, she turned toward him. One look, and the young god flung himself from the car and bounded to her side. Short is ever the wooing, when an Olympian sets his heart on one of the daughters of men. That same day saw the forsaken of Theseus, the friendless castaway, made the blissful bride of a god. And now Ariadne dwells with him forever in the golden court of heaven, for, at the prayer of Bacchus, his father Zeus bestowed immortality and immortal youth upon her. And to honor the wife of his beloved son, Zeus changed the jeweled coronal she wore as a Cretan princess into the glittering constellation that men still call Ariadne's crown. "Truly, Ariadne had her reward," said Odysseus as Circe paused, "and I wish all your stories ended as happily as this one. But I should like to know what became of Daedalus, for without his help she could never have got Theseus out of the labyrinth, and moreover he was evidently a marvelous craftsman." "Ah," said Circe. "Daedalus was less fortunate than those other two. He knew that, when their flight was discovered, Minos would guess that he had betrayed the secret of the labyrinth, and that he too must flee from Crete to escape the king's vengeance. And he must take with him his young son, Icarus by name. As you say, Odysseus, Daedalus was a marvelous craftsman. So he made 4 great wings, larger and stronger than an eagle's, and with melted wax he fastened one pair to his own shoulders and the other pair on his son's. 'Now we will fly across the sea,' he said, 'but beware, Icarus, of flying too high, lest the sun's heat melt the wax again.' Then forthwith they rose in the air and flew away westward. Daedalus had resolved to make for the island of Sicily, and there he landed in due course, by help of a fair wind. But Icarus, being young and foolhardy, and delighted with this new power of flight, soared higher and ever higher as they went, disregarding his father's warning. At last, he flew so high that the noonday sun melted the wax, and his wings dropped off, so he fell into the sea and was drowned. And that part of the Midland Sea is called the Icarian Sea to this day. Now when Minos heard that Daedalus had taken refuge in a city of Sicily, he went there with a great fleet and, when the citizens would not give him up, laid siege to the place. But the citizens made a brave defense, killing many of the besiegers, and at last Minos himself was slain by an arrow from the walls. As for Daedalus, he died not long after of grief for his son's loss, and was honorably buried in that city.